I'm Jim Collison and live from the Gallup campus here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on March 15th, 2019. Called to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions during this live webcast, we do have a chat room available for you. It's either to the right or below the video. And Adam, I had to change that. Right or down below the video window down there on the YouTube page. There's actually a link below the main video window on our live page. I'll take you to a YouTube page and there's chat there. We'd love to have you do that, and we'll be taking your questions live during the program today. So log in and join us in chat. If you have questions after this webcast, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. It's really the best email address for any questions that you might have. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strength Center. It's gallupstrengthcenter.com for all your Clifton Strengths coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video in both streaming and downloadable audio for offline listening. We call that podcasting. All the cool kids are doing it. Great way to recover that time on a train, in a plane, in a car, some of those kinds of things, walking the dog. You can do that, or the cat. I don't discriminate. You can do that. All that information is available on our coaches blog. Head over to coaching.gallup.com. Dr. Jim Harter and Adam Hickman are our guests today. Jim is Gallup's chief scientist based here in Omaha. Adam is a learning design consultant based out of his home office in Ohio. And Jim and Adam, welcome to Called to Coach.
Great to be with you today.
Yes, great to have you. Adam, welcome back. Adam joined us for the last podcast on research when we talked about how to use our comparison blogs and maybe some tips on how to do research. Jim, today we want to spend a bunch of time talking about research from your level, as being a senior scientist for Gallup. We know that Gallup.com is a very important tool to what we do and to the data that we have. And I want to spend a little time with you today and kind of ask you this question right out of the chute. For coaches, and they don't, oftentimes I get questions and I end up, Adam is the same way. We end up sending them to Gallup.com anyway to get that answer. But let's start off a little bit by saying, Jim, if you were a coach and you were trying to navigate our site, Gallup.com, what's there and what's some advice that you would give them on easier ways to just find the information we expose there?
Yeah, sure. And, the first step is probably to think about, how you absorb information, because we have a lot of different types of information on Gallup.com. That's where we put all of our recent articles, perspective papers, which are kind of an overall look at a topic like agility or the boomer generation or exit interviews or onboarding or whatever it might happen to be, diversity and inclusion, innovation. So we're continuously developing perspectives, science-based perspectives on various topics. So those are a little bit longer than an article, but still pretty quick reads. And they provide you our latest. And then we also have my favorite, research reports. They're out there too. And those are more in-depth, more statistical. But if you like that sort of thing, and some people do, some don't, the perspectives kind of take those research reports and make them a bit easier to digest, as do the articles, which are really short. We have blogs, which we can offer, again, some more perspective in a shorter kind of format on some research that was recently done. Maybe compare it to what's going on out there in the world, a current topic. So blogs are useful for that. And we also have our bigger state of reports: state of American workplace, state of the global workplace, state of customers, business to business customers, all kinds of those kind of broader state of reports. And those are really designed to summarize our recent years, several years worth of data. We don't publish those every year for every topic. Those are every few years we'll update those. And so those are out there as well. How do you find them? To me, the easiest way to find things on Gallup.com is to use a search engine. You can either search on individual authors that you might want to find information on that you like that maybe speak to your voice, authors, writers. You can search for research reports. The data on Gallup.com are also categorized according to different practices you may be interested in. And so I would use that search engine to search for authors, subjects that you're interested in. Again, any of those I listed off and many others are out there, and we have numerous articles on a lot of different topics, and we're continuously producing new articles and new reports. So it's probably hard to keep up with all of them, but we do post the most recent ones front page, so you'll see those. And if you make it a habit to kind of go out there and look once a week, you'll see the most recent stuff front page, I think.
Yeah, I think we have some alerts you can sign up for. We're continuing to tweak that process to make it better for you. Jim, when we think about like the state of the American workplace and the effort, the research effort that goes into pulling that data set, and you could probably talk all day about that, but maybe in a minute or two, what's our methodology? We often have our coaches quote these numbers, but embedded in the reports on the back pages are often how big the sample size is and some of those. But can you give us kind of a brief rundown? What does it take to do the initial research to produce a report like the State of the American Workplace? What goes into that?
A report of that type really is an accumulation of several years worth of research that we've done. So from the trending, which are, the top line trending of engagement across the workplaces in the U.S. and then globally, that's accumulated over time, and those are large, very large data sets of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, really, of respondents. And so we accumulate all those data, but then the part that that tells us what the state is, but then we dig in a lot deeper throughout the years leading up to the report into specific topics that we've found are top of mind issues for organizations. And so we're very purposeful about diving into areas that organizations, we know organizations we're working with are interested in, problems they're trying to solve, maybe new occurrences in the workplace, the changing workplace. There's a lot of examples of that, like remote working, flex time. These are all areas that artificial intelligence, we're working on a perspective right now on that. But those perspectives then will get summarized into that larger report. So kind of have a document that has all of it in a condensed format. So it's got both overall trends plus deep dives into specific topics that organizations are focused on.
We spend a lot of time thinking about sample size. We don't talk about that a lot, but I know you guys think a lot about sample size. When we think of something like the State of the American Workplace, we have, we advertise 20 million folks have taken strengths. We have 35 million plus on our engagement side. But when you do a State of the American Workplace, typically, what are you looking for from a sample size? What could we know from that?
Well, what these large sample sizes allow us to do, so when you're talking hundreds of thousands of respondents in any one report, is that you can detect whether, for instance, a 1 percentage point difference is meaningful or not. That's really the value of these large sample sizes, because in many cases, the variables that we're measuring aren't going to, while they may change dramatically in organizations, they're in the populace. You're not going to see dramatic shifts. The engagement trend is an example of that, where we might see a point improvement in a year, 6 to 8 points over time. That represents a lot of workers. And it's important to know whether change is actually happening. And we don't want to just rely on smaller sample sizes where, it would take, that much growth in any 1 year to detect that it's meaningful. So the large sample sizes give us more precision in estimating exactly how many people are engaged at work, for instance, and to be able to look at these significant but slow changing trends that have an impact on society.
We're going to talk about two numbers here in just a second when we think about our engagement numbers, global and U.S. If a coach was looking at one of our reports, Jim, and oftentimes they'll run up against somebody with high analytical, that they want to know everything. Mm-hmm. How would you, and they want to know, okay, how big is the sample? How is this done? Some of those very practical data science questions. Where would they go in the report to find that info? We do put it in there. Where would they go to find it?
There's an appendix in the back of the report, and there's for each section in the report, there's a description of the methodology, which lists the sample size in there and where the data came, what the data source was for the various findings in that section. So it's all in there in the back. It's kind of good reference material for people that want those kinds of details. And to me, they're very important details, but they don't go in the front because most people aren't looking at that first. But so pretty easy to find, and they're organized into those kind of chapters or sections of the report.
Jim, I want to jump in on a couple of things just to keep people, if you're thinking of as a coach, how do I stay in tune with this? Because there's a lot out there. Just Gallup.com, there's so much. There's a few things that I would say is really helpful for us on the learning side of things, on how we keep in touch. I mean, it's easy to reach out, but I think there's 10 o'clock at night when you've got something on your mind and you're curious about it from the report. This is this is our secret weapon that we're going to the reports too. But the things that are leading up to when we're about to launch a report, we've got these briefings that we do in our city centers are all around, and you can see that they're free to come to. So if you think of a report that launches, we kind of get to give some of the greatest findings about that. There's a rollout of articles that are leading up to either right when it launches or after, where you'll see almost like a drip of certain articles that stem from that add to it and things of that sort. And then really, if you want to go really well in depth into what the research shows, we partner with, we call the practice here with Jim and team, to build workshops around it. So say your organization's really curious about the workplace or the state of, in those individual chapters, we've got an entire curriculum built around, if you want to do something with that or about that or explore more or push your thinking on what that is, we've got workshops to go around with that. I think this year at the summit, for those that are attending, you'll probably seen something on there about the millennials, how they like to work and live. And that stems from the research done by Dr. Harter and team. But also that's a combination of, now we've got to take it out to the world and teach people what we know about it so they can do something back in their workplace with this generation. And I think that's a great example to show, like, if you think of yourself, well, what would I as a coach do with this? Well, you got to read it first. But then if you think of how you incorporate it into your conversations, into your presentations itself, I see a lot of Facebook posts where you ask about certain things that I don't want to say it's in the report, but it's in the report. We're not hiding it. It's out there. You just got to know what Jim had said, talked about the keywords to go find it.
Adam, thanks for that. It is important to know, oftentimes as we launch a report, we're going to talk about our book launch. And that's really, it's more than a book. There's a ton of research that we've done around the manager here in just a little bit as we talk about that. But as we launch it, then there are briefings, there are training, there are new courses that are provided that become available. So you definitely want to keep your eyes open for that. Jim, let's dig into a few numbers. As we spend a lot of time with our coaches thinking about strengths, but oftentimes strengths are the most valuable or the most powerful in the context of engagement. And we spend a lot of time talking about engagement. We've got two particular numbers that we really kind of land on. Can you talk a little bit about those? And then how do we derive those? And maybe how are we doing with those?
Yeah, so we have been trending engagement starting in our engagement metric actually is developed globally, but we started trending US data in the year 2000. And so we've got a trend that goes up to 2018. Now we're still trending in 2019. And we calculate engagement based on a composition of critical elements, questions and answers related to issues that managers can actually do a lot about. Elements such as clarity of expectations. Do people have a chance to do what they do best? Do they get recognition when they do good work? Do their opinions count at work? Do they have a chance to develop over time? We talk about that here in a little bit, but so combining those important elements together gives us a metric on how involved and enthusiastic employees are with their work and workplace. So there's really three categories that we calculate. Percent engaged. These are the people who are involved, enthusiastic, come to work, really the people that organizations are looking for when they hire individuals. They want people who are involved, enthusiastic with their work, and are highly productive and committed, put in that discretionary effort. They're the people that keep you going when your company faces a threat. The not engaged group, that's the majority of workers in the US and the world, and they show up, do the minimum required, they'll take another offer if they get the opportunity. They might be satisfied and content, but they're not highly involved and enthusiastic about the workplace. And then there's a group we call actively disengaged. These are people who actually are working against what the organization is trying to get done. They've got some emotion connected in a negative way with the organization. And a lot of this has to do with what their local manager does. So about 70% of the variance in team engagement is related back to various behaviors that we can link back, talents, behaviors in the engagement of the manager themselves, link back to that manager, their local manager or team leader. Now in the US, currently 34% of employees are engaged in their work. Now that number's grown. The starting point in the year 2000 was 26%. Last decade, it's grown from about 28 to 34. So there have been some pretty purposeful things that organizations have done that have probably moved that needle. We'd like it to have moved a lot faster. But as I said earlier, at least we can detect whether changes are occurring because we've got large sample sizes. Globally, 15% of employees are engaged. Now, those numbers might, by the way, when we first started training globally, it was about 11%. So while those numbers might seem low, and maybe you even get a little depressed listening to those numbers, the good news is many organizations have done very purposeful things to change them. So we've seen organizations that are at the bottom of our database, they're in the teens in terms of percent engaged, that have gone to 70% plus, and they've done some very intentional things to get there. A lot of it has to do with how they develop managers from boss to coach. I think that's one of the more critical components there. So we're going to continue to track it. We continue to study what relates to performance in organizations, but when you kind of bring together attitudes and performance and look at the nexus between those two, that's what we think of as engagement, the types of attitudes that lead to high levels of performance. So these organizations that improve also see improvements in their business results on average across the organizations. Engagement doesn't explain everything, but it explains a important part of the workplace that differentiates successful managers and teams and organizations from others.
Jim, how do we know that's a representative sample of across industries? I get this question all the time. So you're saying 34%. How do I know that's across industries, across different types of workplaces, across different styles of work, and some of those kinds of things? How do we ensure that, or how do we know that?
Our methodologists design, so we have sampling methodologists that design sampling frames so that we're actually going out to households and randomly sampling not only households, but people within the households, asking them whether they're working or not. So the numbers I just quoted are people who work in organizations right now. So that doesn't include self-employed folks. It's people who are employed within workplaces, both globally and in the U.S. And so we have sampling methodologists that put a lot of attention to just how you go about obtaining a random sample. George Gallup started this work, decades ago. This is back when people had trouble believing that you could just take 1,000 people in the U.S. and represent an entire country. But it works out if you do it right. You can actually represent a large populace with a smaller sample if you do the sampling correctly.
Jim, when we do a State of the American Workplace report, you're talking kind of our sampling method when we think about how we do and the phone calls we do and some of those things. When we're including engagement data, is that coming right from our Q12, or do we do some additional research as well on that?
Well, it's coming from asking those Q12 questions too. So the Q12 is our instrument that measures those various elements of engagement. It's coming from measuring Q12, asking the Q12 questions to a broader population of people. So we have various different types of data that we can reference here. It's kind of a luxury in a sense, in that we can go into organizations and study a census population in an organization. So we get like 85+% response rates in organizations. So we can do a lot with that. We can map the data down to teams within organizations and study the teams and how those teams perform. That's a pretty rich data set. Those aren't random samples, but they're full censuses within, or close to full census within organizations. Then we have the luxury of taking what we learn in organizations, putting it on a broader poll, and conducting a random sample to get a feel for how the entire populace is doing on a topic. So we do both of those two things, and they both have big benefits. The work in organizations we can use to create change, to change a culture, for instance, which impacts performance. The population numbers tell us how well we're doing across organizations. So we're hoping that as we keep working, us and others keep working with more organizations in an in-depth way and teaching them the right practices, that those population numbers will keep going up, because it has enormous implications on society, not only the performance of organizations, but the development of people and their well-being. What people want right now out of, one of the top priorities in life is to have a great job. because people now know that work and life are so blended. So, you can't get too excited about that mission of helping organizations improve in a way that also helps people improve their lives.
Joe, I love when we ask a question and then you get this much, and then there's so much that comes behind it. Like, that is the best possible answer. I want to throw out here, Jim, too, that so looking at, I've got the report pulled up. So if you're thinking as a coach, how do I take everything Jim said and make it applicable to me? Because there's so much in there. I think the best thing is that it helps create the story that you're trying to build the foundation for of why they need you. And if you've heard those specific numbers about this engagement, I'm looking at the table of contents. I can't imagine there's not one conversation that won't come up where you're going to talk about what's your workplace sell, the truth and benefits about perks, managing performance, matrix teams. I've got a special place for remote workers, chapter 8. It's probably my favorite one chapter. And then anything engagement at the end. It just, I mean, even down to the lighting of how that affects people in an organization. There's just so much in here that I think you could pack around your story of coming into an organization, or if you're about to go coach a millennial, why not just know everything we know about millennials? It's not going to hurt. It's only going to help. So when someone says something, you've got folks like Dr. Harter that have put time and effort and all the people involved with it behind you to say it's out there.
I think you both kind of just blew some coaches' minds, because I think not most. Let me retract that. I think some have thought that State of the American Workplace report is really just about the numbers 15 and 34, and all we do is talk about engagement. But Adam, you'd mentioned, just quick, read that table of contents again. What are the topics that we cover? And that we're going to do this in depth, by the way, at part 2 with Jim. So we're not going to spend too much more time on this,
Sure.
But read those for me.
Yeah, like, do employees want what your workplace is selling? The real truth about benefits and perks, the competitive edge or advantage of engaging employees, a shift in managing performance. A closer look at the 12 elements of engagement. Dr. Harter might know a little bit about that one. Making sense of matrix teams. That's such a hot topic right now, matrix and remote. Sometimes they blend them together, and like, we do a really good job of explaining the difference between the two, but even the complexities involved. What do those folks need? What do they have to make them engage? There's that part of that story. Changing place and space of work. Look at the three of us. We're all over the place, but we show up every day highly engaged, ready to get it done. And then a little bit further into each 12 element on chapter 9 it goes through. But let me just do one more plug, Jim, on this. And this is another Dr. Harter one. I thought, if you're a coach and you're checking out Gallup.com, check out the one posted March 13th, 2 days ago, about 5 questions every onboarding program must answer. When I was scanning over this, the questions that are asked on there are fantastic questions to ask if you're a coach. So, what do we believe in around here? Pretty simple sentence, lengthy conversation, right? How much can you open up in a person to find that out, if they're considering changing jobs or they want to get into a profession? Even just the term belief being the key word there about what do you believe in, and then around who do you want to be around with, things of that sort. And the other, I won't give them away because I hope you go out and read it, but the other 4 that are on there, if I was writing a course, pertain to onboarding, one of our tactics we would do is connect with Jim, but I would be coming to Jim and say, Jim, when you wrote this question one, tell me what you were thinking about this around this, so I know how I can build other questions and learning to get to the root of what that question is. I just think as a coach, as you're building your programs, like, this is out there, and you don't need a Visa or MasterCard to go get it. Just go read it.
Jim, would you add anything to that?
No,
that article?
It was good description. I mean, we try to get at, I think, with onboarding. So I love getting into these in depth into just one aspect, because you can kind of understand the truth that underlies. And for many people with onboarding, it's just not a great experience. And think about what tone that sets. You've sold someone on whatever organization you're working with, they sold someone on joining them. Are you living up to that or not? Only about 1 in 10 people, a little over 1 in 10, including leaders, will say their organization didn't do a great job of onboarding. That's a huge opportunity right there. And I think there's some low-hanging fruit, just some of these basic questions about, one of them is, what are my strengths? I mean, if you can accomplish that early on, what do we believe in? What are our strengths? What team am I on? What's my role? These are basic things that are just overlooked in organizations that we have a lot of opportunity to get right.
Yeah, I have no less than 5 strengths conversations with the new employees in their first 2 weeks. So we spend a lot of time, and you'd say, well, yeah, you're Gallup. Of course you do that. Well, no, that's hard to do, and you have to be very, very intentional about it.
Jim, I've got an idea, and I got to get it out.
Okay.
It's on onboarding. Doctor, when you said, what is my role? There's a ton of data points that come to my head right away from State of the American Workplace, where if I were going to offer a workshop or a coaching conversation about what is your role, it stems into the one further in here about what's my future look like here. I think you could have multiple coaching conversations about how many people don't know their specific role because they don't know what's expected of them, or they're doing a role that's not right, the demands of the job in itself. And then you think of, well, maybe you need to look at what your future looks like here. And if that does, can you fit into that? Not top jobs, but maybe job craft, or get particular about how can you evolve your current role that you're in and offer something different. That stems around all 5 of these conversations. So I just think if you're out there as a coach thinking how to pull this, the narrative straight through, you've got a report to support everything related to these 5 questions. You've got really great stuff out here to start these conversations, and then you've got your whole plethora of coaching experience to apply to this that would just,
why that's so important is about 91% of people who change jobs change companies. So people aren't right now seeing where they're headed, and you can start that off right away in that onboarding phase. And I really believe when people don't see their future after that phase, everything else just continues to dwindle, and eventually they're gone.
Jim, a couple quick questions. You had said back a few minutes ago about successful organizations. We use that word a lot. Mm-hmm. How do we quantify successful organizations? Lisa asked that question in the chat room. How do we say that? How do we know that they're successful?
Yeah. Great question. When we're studying psychological variables in organizations that impact them, we first have to kind of take a step back and understand what are the objectives they're trying to accomplish, and then look at best practices within those objectives. So one objective for a for-profit organization is profit. They're making money, that they're making that they're making profit in the way that works for them. If it's a nonprofit, there's going to be a financial element to that as well, but they may have a customer or members that they're serving. That's another element. How well are they delivering to their customer base? Also retention rates. We know organizations are not just after one outcome. We know there's a lot of outcomes that have to be going right for an organization to be successful. They've got to have reasonable employee retention rates. Now, nobody's at 0, so that's not realistic, but you can significantly, many companies shave off, they'll cut their turnover in half just by using the right practices. And industries will vary in turnover rates, so you have to kind of look at it in terms of the standards for each industry. So it's not across all organizations, but you've got to look at the outcomes specific to the industries and the organization types that you're looking at. There are many organizations that are concerned with accidents on the job and safety, so that's another one that can be included in there. But we look at a composite of a lot of different outcomes when we judge success, not just any one outcome, because generally successful organizations have a lot of good things going right. And then we award organizations for having great workplaces based on how engaged their workplace is, but also how they have linked that strategically to the outcomes that they're trying to improve on over time. And even how they've linked it statistically to that. And then we look at all their practices around improving their culture as well. And one of the big ones we find underlying all that is again, really comes back to the quality of their managers and how they're improving the quality of their managers over time, because culture, you can't really improve a culture in a reliable way without great managers.
And then when we think of those numbers 34 and 15, we have global engagement numbers by country. Mm-hmm. Is 34 the best? And why does the U.S. ahead of the globe in engagement? Is it a work style thing? Is it the way we do business here? Is it awareness of it? Any ideas there? Ralph was asking that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I have all the answers to that. The U.S. isn't the highest. We've got some countries down like Panama and Costa Rica down in Central America that are a little bit higher, but the U.S. is among the highest. And generally, when you look at countries that have seen some changes, you see some kind of purposeful things that have happened within that. Like we looked at Singapore during our last report, and they had a big jump in percent engaged, which you usually don't see in a country, although that's a city-state country, so it's maybe more achievable because it's a smaller subset. But at the same time, we looked into it, and their government had done some things to promote promote development within businesses, and so there were some things there. Sometimes we'll see that there have been changes in the types of business opportunities that are available within a country, but generally, when it comes down to it, the reason that engagement improves is that you just have higher quality managers within an organization. That's the number one causal factor, is the quality of managers within organizations. So perhaps the U.S. has been better at endorsing manager development than some other countries. But we have always been toward the top on that. You could look at some other countries. Some people have commented to me, I would have expected Finland and Denmark, because they have such high well-being, to have higher engagement, but they don't have, so many of the European countries are a bit lower and have had some downward trends. But so those are areas of opportunity for those parts of the world, right? So work might be approached a bit differently. In many cases, there's a lot of emphasis on policy. I think policy is important, but policy shouldn't replace having a great workplace. In fact, policy is often interpreted based on whether people have an engaging workplace or not. So you could put a policy in place in terms of number of work hours, but that might assume, let's say you minimize work hours, that might assume that work has to be miserable, right? Why do we have to assume that work has to be miserable? And there might be a policy around nobody gets to use their iPhones to do email outside of normal work hours. But that puts the policy ahead of actually getting work done and what people might enjoy. Some people might want to work on the weekends so that they don't have to worry about as much on the weekdays. So I think the more that we get into this, we learn that it is about how managers connect with employees and individualize as much as possible. And I think Strengths gives us an avenue into that, where we can open up that conversation. And Adam was talking about remote working. Man, that's been on the rise, and it really is the case that managers who manage remote workers have to be a bit more intentional about some things, connecting with people. They have to be more intentional about how they perform, how they manage folks. They've got to be very intentional about accountability. That's always important, but and they have to do it in a way that is right for the person. And everybody's somewhat different, but great managers find those shortcuts and figure it out. I'll stop.
I don't want to steal too much from remote working, but I just finished all of my interviews for my dissertation last week. And the number one thing, so far, I haven't done any hand coding yet, that's come back is this sense of isolation comes from a lack of communication with their manager. So no surprise there. But also having a best friend at work or having someone to speak to. Otherwise, I was thinking, oh, you mean you need a coach? You don't have a coach to work with or to talk to or things of that sort. So those would be the three things that I would say so far from what our research shows and does that I've heard loud and clear from remote workers all over the US on things that they're missing. If you look at, chapter 8, that's the only chapter I know in the State of the American Workplace inside and out. It talks specifically about aspects of that.
Jim, we would assume, when we think about remote workers, and Adam, you used to sit right next to me, and now you're in Ohio, and I've been very intentional about making sure I reach out to you at least once a week. Not your manager, by the way, but I know from an organizational standpoint, those are important. Yeah. Jim, you would think remote workers would be more engaged. I think sometimes we have this assumption or that, I get to work from home. It's great. But our data doesn't necessarily lead to that, right? I mean, there's some caveats in there.
Yeah, it's a more nuanced answer. If you look at both ends of the continuum, people who are 100% remote versus those who are 0% remote, that's actually if you look at the different combinations, those two have a little bit lower engagement than the other combinations. And I think what that's telling me, it comes back to some kind of principles about what really engages people at work. It's about autonomy, right? If people have a little bit of flexibility to work remote, and it isn't right for every job, of course, we've got to adjust that to the work. But if autonomy is pretty important to people, but when you increase autonomy, you've got to increase some other things too. You've got to make sure people are connected to each other. We got to make sure there's some accountability systems, and there's got to still be continuous development. They have to be able to develop within that autonomy to improve themselves and improve the organization. So, to me that. So when we studied this during our last report, not this most recent one, we'd found that 1 day a week of remote working had that resulted in the highest levels of engagement. In this latest report, it's increased even to 2 to 3 days. So it doesn't mean you can't take that and say, well, okay, that means that's the solution for everybody. It's an average across the population, but it does kind of tell us something about autonomy, I think, and the difference in work expectations now that people are probably expecting to have a little bit more autonomy in terms of where they work, and many businesses are set up to do that now. I utilize it when I do my writing, and I get a lot more done that way.
Yeah, no, I think you've alluded to this. It's about the manager and the way that relationship is managed, the way that remote distance or whatever. And really, even for those who we joke sometimes, I'm going to work from work. I'm going to let my coworkers know, hey, I'm working from work today. Just wanted to make sure you knew that. Coming in the office, I'll be in my office if you need to see me. But Jim, because it's the manager, and we're putting so much emphasis this year on talking about that and the value of that. When we think about our coaches going out and working with organizations, what kind of advice would you give them about the impact they can make working in organizations? There's different ways of doing this with one-on-one coaching, or going in and doing workshops, or spending time, with that coaching. What have we found out about coaching and the managers that you would say is the most important?
Well, one of the statistics that I think is really important with regard to managers is that less than a third say they have someone who encourages their development. That's way too low. And the reason I say that is managers have to be able to cascade their own experiences to their employees. Managers have a little bit higher stress, worse physical well-being, less clear expectations than the people they manage directly. So again, another area for huge opportunity. It doesn't have to be that way, though. It's you can double that 1 in 3 to 2 in 3, and think about the enormous impact that would have on an organization. And it's very possible, but it has to be intentional. And so I think strengths-based coaches have the best opportunity to be intentional about development. And when I say development, I mean moving managers to a mentality of boss, the old workforce, I'm the boss, to one of being the coach that really aligns more with the future workforce, the current and future workforce. And that's people come to work wanting to be coached. They don't want you to ignore their weaknesses, but they want you to put a significant amount of time thinking about their strengths. So when you're coaching managers, you're producing a ripple effect on the population, because if the ratio of manager to direct reports is 1 to 10 direct reports for every manager, think about the ripple effect of that across all the different managers that you have a chance to coach. And we've got to get kind of, one of the things we've learned recently is that we've got to get that manager experience right if we want to get the employee experience right. And that happens at all stages of the life cycle, and it has a potentially big effect on lives and, of course, performance.
Jim, do we have any feel for the value or the takeaway, the negative value of a disengaged manager versus a disengaged employee? Is it more expensive if your managers, if they're equally disengaged? Is one more expensive than the other? If you were going to prioritize your time or prioritize your coaching, would you go after one or the other?
The reason that I would put so much emphasis on the manager is that there is that cascade effect where the manager's engagement will cascade to their team. Now, that's not always going to be the case, but on average, and just another statistic for you, about 2/3 of managers that we study are either not engaged or actively disengaged. So how could you possibly expect the employees of those managers to be engaged, except if, they might do, some of them will do it on their own, figure it out on their own and work around their not engaged or disengaged manager. But on average, it's very difficult for the direct reports of a not engaged or disengaged manager to be engaged. And so you've got a compounding effect if you focus on the manager first. It doesn't mean that coaching for individual contributors isn't useful. It's very useful. Everybody needs an opportunity to get to know their strengths and how they can leverage their strengths to affect their team and affect their organization and affect their own future. So it isn't one without the other, but that's where I'd put the priority in terms of impact.
You mentioned this word grassroots. Hold on, Adam. Let me say this real quick before I forget. You mentioned that grassroots idea, and I would have no data to back this up, but it would be interesting to study in organizations where strengths grows from a grassroots movement. What's the engagement level of its managers? Because oftentimes I think that the employees bringing strengths in may be a direct result of the disengagement that's happening at the management level, or the disconnect that is happening. And the employees are desperate to stay. They want to make a difference, but they're not getting the leadership and the engagement that they need from their manager. And so they're growing it themselves. Coaches, that may be assigned to you as you're working with organizations. If the requests are coming from the employees, you may have a huge, again, Jim, I could be making this up and this could be wrong, but you may be seeing an area where you need to attack the managers and not necessarily the employees. Jim, would you dialogue with me? Am I off base on that, or what?
I think that's a possible scenario in some organizations. Generally, the grassroots happens in pockets, many times started by the manager. I think in organizations where employees naturally might feel connected to the mission or purpose of the organization, they're there for that, and they're frustrated that they're not getting what they need as an employee. I could see that happening. So there's going to be some both directions in terms of causality. I think we always see that in the data. It's not just one direction, and I think both are possible.
Yeah.
I think it's going to take off faster if the manager's behind it.
Yeah. Well, we know that from the data, right? And when we think about our strengths-based culture work, we know it goes a lot faster, or it's a lot more successful if it begins from the managers and works its way down. Adam, I cut you off. What were you gonna say?
I just was thinking, like, if I'm a coach on my own, what do I do with this? What are my indicators to find out if they are? Because you can't, it's not like you can go to a manager, like, are you a bad manager? It's not, they're probably not going to say, maybe they'll say yes, I don't know. But I think that some of the clues that are out there today that I see nonstop, picture Sunday night, Sunday-ish, seems like this is when it heats up the most. You're on LinkedIn or you're on Facebook and you see those people that just are already posting pictures or sentences about, I really don't want to go to work tomorrow. Or, I can't believe it's Monday, or I can't wait till it's Friday. I always want to engage with that and be like, well, what's wrong with your job? Like, what is it about it that you have a physical reaction that you don't want to get up to go to it tomorrow? Because I think in there is a coaching conversation to find out, well, maybe they're in the wrong role, or maybe there's more to it. And then you think of, well, how much is their manager contributing to that? All that data that Dr. Harter just talked about probably leads up to a person willing to claim out in space that they have no desire to go to work the next day. Yeah. And if you think of the amount of hours you spend at work, you should enjoy and love every second of it. So I just, like, if I think of if I was a coach, where would I start? Like, well, look in your own network first. Like, you'll start to see pockets and samples and, patterns that you can pick up quickly for that.
We have a pretty amazing resource coming in a book called "It's the Manager." Jim is the author of that, along with Jim Clifton, our CEO. We are Jim. We are really looking forward to launching this. But as you think about as you wrote this and the materials that are in it, and coaches, by the way, it's themanager.com. You can sign up for it. We're not pre-sale yet, but there are some resources that are available for you. You can sign up. We'll notify you when the book's available, all that other great stuff. It's themanager, all one word.com. Jim, when you think about it for coaches, what kind of advice would you give using this 52? It's got 52 chapters associated with it, all short little snippets, all with some additional things for them to do in it. What would you think? How would you recommend that they use this future resource that we'll have available for them?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. The book is organized, those 52 are organized into 5 sections. There's a section on, and you may find use from a perspective standpoint in the first few. The first one is on strategy, organizational strategy and how the manager fits into strategy, how the manager, another section on culture, how the manager fits into culture. We've got another section on, we call it employment brand. It's really going through that whole life cycle and what the role of the manager is in all that. Really, if you're going to have a culture that truly represents your brand, and brands nowadays are, or the cultures are pretty transparent because of social media. How do you put the right culture in place that represents your brand and your purpose as an organization? So that's the third section. The fourth one I think you'll find particularly relevant. It's related to what we've been talking about here today, and it's called boss to coach. So it's really the fundamentals of moving from boss to coach and how you take a strengths-based approach to do that, and based on what we've learned across different organizations in our various databases. And then the last section is we call the future of work, and that includes all these more recent categories of things organizations are interested in, from diversity and inclusion. That's of course been of interest for quite a while, but it's heated up a lot lately in terms of the media and what organizations are concerned with. So diversity and inclusion is one. We've got several chapters for that one. Women in the workplace, we've got one on the boomers, baby boomers. Many of them are retiring, some of them aren't. How do we manage that? There's another section on innovation. Agility is a hot topic nowadays. We've got a chapter on agility. So there's a whole host, artificial intelligence, HCM systems, human capital management systems that are out there, what some of the principles are behind utilizing them most effectively. So it's that section has varied topics in it, but kind of the undercurrent throughout all of it is, to get any of this right, you've got to have quality managers who transmit information effectively, develop people within the context of all these changes that are happening, are attuned with problems as they're happening so that they can keep them from becoming bigger issues, so to speak. So to be close to the action throughout all of these different topics is really important. So that's kind of, so when you asked how do you use it, if I were you, I would kind of scan the table of contents, think about issues that one of your clients or that you're facing, and you don't have to read it cover to cover. It's not really that kind of a book. You could, but it's really set up so that you take a chapter, share it with somebody, they can read it in 10 minutes, get together and have a good discussion about it.
Jim, sometimes we take it, and this is coming from a comment Ralph's making in the chat room. Sometimes we're a U.S.-based company. Our research is done here in the United States. We're thinking about the globe with our data numbers. But oftentimes, or sometimes, folks feel that our research is U.S. biased, right? In other words, it comes from a very U.S.-centric standpoint. You wrote these materials. As we think about the other cultures around the world reading this material, how would you respond to that? A little bit, saying maybe, hey, yeah, this is great advice, but it's really U.S. biased.
Well, we've these constructs that we're measuring and that we're reporting on actually have all been developed within an international set of data. So it's not like we've relied only on U.S. data for designing any of this. We've also tested the generalizability of the variables we're measuring, including engagement, strengths, across a multitude of different countries. In fact, we've seen as businesses in these different countries apply the right kinds of people practices, they all see growth. So I mentioned earlier that we have a Gallup Great Workplace Award that we give out. If you look down that list of companies that have won it historically, you'll see wide variation across not only country and region of the world, but you also see wide variation in industry. So just because one country or situation happens to be a little different than another one doesn't mean that we're not all coming to work with some human nature. And human nature is when you get down to the fundamentals of it has a lot more consistency than many people would believe. And so we've tried to focus in on the elements of human nature that are more generalizable. You'll see as if you have a chance to take a look at the book in the we've got sections in there where we have done measured a lot of the same variables that we're reporting on in the U.S. And these are some of the real in-depth kind of areas that we're studying in in a variety of countries in Europe that we've had a chance to study over the last few years. So it's international based. Admittedly, we have more data in the U.S. than anywhere else. And that's just how it's happened to fall out. And we've put a lot of resources into tracking U.S., but we also put a lot of resources into tracking global engagement.
In my work with coaches over the last 5 years, I've dedicated my life to spending a lot of time in the coaching community. What is a weakness sometimes with culture is actually, I think, a strength in our coaching base, because you are the translator in between what's being read there and what's actually happening in your local environment. And that's not to say I've seen there are different cultures based on what we see coming out of the Silicon Valley and what happens in Omaha, Nebraska. So some of the different management styles or some of the thoughts in it, we have some very different thoughts here in the Midwest as we would to our friends on the West Coast or on the East Coast. Those who work in New York City, that's going to be a different kind of environment, right, than you're going to see here in Omaha or in Dallas or in Austin, Texas, or in Los Angeles or in Atlanta. Very, very different. As a coach, that's not a disadvantage. That's actually to your advantage. You are on the ground, boots on the ground, local translator or individualizer of that data there to help them really work through those things. So we've got these principles laid out. We've seen this in the data. We've seen these things. We know organizations that do that or in our terms are more successful, see an increase in engagement, but you still have to translate that. We do that through our offices around the world. We in our offices in India and Australia and Singapore and in Europe, in the UK and in Germany, that we have local consultants on the ground or translating those things for us. So never see those, I'll say that, never see those as a disadvantage. Always see them as an advantage. Jim, one more question as we kind of wrap up today's session. When we think about the future of the reports, of the data, of the research we do, how do you guys, it always, to me, I work here and it always seems like I can never figure out where you guys are going next. So how do you, and it's great, by the way, but how do you decide? I'm being a little facetious there, but how do you decide?
We like to keep you guessing, Jim.
I'm just always blind. But,
you're the one person we don't tell.
Don't tell Collison. Don't tell him. But how do we decide what we're going to do next?
It's a great and very important question, I think, is how do you know where to hit? Because there's so many areas that we could dig into, and we have to prioritize. And our priorities are really set based on several different criteria. One is we try to keep really close to organizations that we're working with and really understand what issues they're facing. And so we work with a number of organizations where we actually, we do these in-depth studies. We're measuring the opinions of every one of their employees, strengths of their employees, even helping them select their people for jobs. And so we can stay pretty close to the issues that they're facing and keep track of that. We also have a roundtable of CHROs in Fortune 500 companies, about 300 of them that we listen to continuously about the issues that they're facing. And so we've got a mechanism for that. That's really useful. In fact, that was really useful in designing the sections of our recent book and what we ought to prioritize there, because, to get down to 52, there are certainly hundreds of areas we could study, but we tried to study all of them that they mentioned were relevant. We also look at external reports. We review not just Gallup reports. We take a look at external reports from a wide variety of sources that are publicly published on the top. You see these top 10 lists out there. We review every one of those things. Some of them come from academic sources. Some of them are like Society of Industrial Organizational Psychologists will actually interview their members and publish that report. I'm one of those, so I'm involved in that opinion. But there's a lot of other industry reports that are published about, what does the future of work look like in the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years. We take account of that as well. And then we also have Gallup Access. So that's our platform for delivering learning, education, and then also deploying surveys. So the measurement plus the education component. So we listen to Gallup Access user feedback and get feedback from users of that on what issues they're facing. We also have a lot of customer-facing Gallup consultants. This kind of relates to my first point, but just trying to stay close to what organizations, what issues they're facing. Then we also have a number of people on our team that attend academic and business conferences throughout the year, and that's another avenue for listening to organizations, what other people are studying as well, and having one-on-one dialogue with individuals on what the biggest issues are that they're facing. So there's probably more than that, but what we try to do is we try to continuously update that list of topics, and that then turns into some of these perspective papers that I was referring to. We try to get the perspective papers out as quickly as we can, and then those then get condensed into those state of reports. So we're working on a perspective paper right now on artificial intelligence that took literally a review of hundreds of articles on the topic, and also collecting a bunch of our own data. We've got another one in the works now. I mentioned this earlier, that on the baby boomer generation, and what some of the trends are there, and how organization, what some of the top priorities should be for organizations. We've done a report on just about every life cycle stage now. We did one on the employee experience recently because that terminology has come up a lot. So what is our perspective on that? How does engagement fit into that? And then what are best practices at each stage of the life cycle? The employee experience is the journey people take, the experiences they have through that life cycle. So those are some examples. Generation Z is another one that's coming up a lot. They're just entering the workforce, so we're only just now able to collect a lot of data on them. We've got a whole research protocol built around learning as much as we can about them as quickly as possible. We've got a short little perspective right now, but we're going to expand it throughout the year. And then just to let you know, on the manager experience, which talked about a little bit ago, we've got a whole series of studies where we're digging in deep into the experiences managers are having themselves, not just from the perspective of their employees, but what experiences do they have in their work every day.
That's super great. One of the things I really love is that we bleeding edge and having opinions on things before we've done the research is not our style. And so, we may mention opinion paper. We may begin talking about it, but then really begin digging in. I get a request for Gen Z all the time, and we're still collecting some data that's not necessarily conclusive, and we're getting some ideas of some things. But Jim, I really appreciate the fact that you guys really spent some time collecting that data, trying to get some things together before we talk about it. Adam, thank you. Jim, thank you for joining us, by the way, to Adam. Thank you as well for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. Hey, guys, hang tight for just 1 second. I hope this was helpful. We'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strengths Center, just gallupstrengthscenter.com. If you have any questions, if there are questions I didn't get answered, and remember, we're going to do part 2 of this with Jim here in a couple weeks. You're going to want to watch our Eventbrite page, so gallup.eventbrite.com, to get that scheduled or to get on it right now. If you enjoy this, you're going to want to be on that call. If you have any questions in the meantime, we'd love to hear those coming up on the State of the American Workplace, coaching@gallup.com. Send us those questions. Maybe put webcasts in the subject line so they get that routed to me, and we'll get that as well. Don't forget, all of our resources are available. This post, and a lot of data going on around it, coaching.gallup.com. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup certified strengths coach, if you heard some things in here or any of our training, Jim mentioned this Boss to Coach course we have coming up that we can send managers through. Coaches, you can take it as well. It's available at our courses page, courses.gallup.com. Don't forget the 2019 summit is coming up as well, June 3rd, 4th, and 5th. You can sign up for that today. Gallup, CliftonStrengthsSummit.com. And then don't forget to join the conversation going on in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/called to coach. If you're writing like crazy to get that down, it's okay. Just stop this, go back. You can listen to it again and write all that down. I want to thank you for joining us today. Appreciate it. For those who came live, great questions today. We'll look forward to the next time we do this. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.